The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered saloon, and Delilah Warren stepped down into the dust of Newton, Kansas, knowing that her carefully constructed new life was already crumbling before it had even begun. She had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis with a letter of introduction clutched in her gloved hand, a letter promising her employment as a schoolteacher in this frontier town that desperately needed someone to educate their children. The year was 1873. And Newton had only recently shed its reputation as one of the wildest cow towns in Kansas. The railroad had brought civilization, or at least the promise of it, and with civilization came the need for schools and teachers and respectable women who could shape young minds. Delilah had thought she could be one of those respectable women. She had thought wrong. The rejection had come swiftly, delivered by Cornelius Pemberton, the head of the school board, a pompous man with a handlebar mustache that seemed to droop with disapproval. He had received her in his office above the general store, his eyes cold as he read through the additional references that had arrived by telegraph that very morning. "Miss Warren," he had said, not even offering her a chair, "it has come to our attention that you previously worked in a dance hall in St. Louis." "A dance hall, Miss Warren, serving drinks to men, dancing with them for money." The words had hung in the air like an accusation, like a verdict already rendered. "That was 2 years ago," Delilah had said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I needed work after my father died. There was nothing else available to a woman with no family and no money. I saved every penny. I went to teacher's college. I earned my certificate. I am qualified to teach." But Pemberton had already made up his mind. The town of Newton could not have a woman with such a past teaching their innocent children. It did not matter that she had done nothing immoral, nothing illegal. It did not matter that she had worked herself to exhaustion to escape that life. The past, he informed her with cold finality, was indelible. Now Delilah stood in the middle of Newton's main street, her small trunk beside her, watching the stagecoach pull away in a cloud of dust. She had spent nearly all her money on the journey here. She had given up her room in St. Louis, had burned her bridges, had bet everything on this new beginning, and now she had nothing. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could feel the eyes of the townspeople on her. News traveled fast in a place like this. They already knew. They were already judging. She picked up her trunk, struggling with its weight, and started walking toward the boarding house at the end of the street. At least she had enough money for a few nights' lodging. After that, she would have to figure something out. Maybe she could find work as a seamstress or a laundress. Maybe she would have to leave Newton entirely, try her luck in another town, hope that her past would not follow her there too. "That looks heavy for someone your size." The voice came from behind her, deep and warm, with a hint of amusement that was not unkind. Delilah turned and found herself looking up at a man who embodied everything she had imagined a cowboy would be. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell to his collar beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were an unusual shade of green, bright against his tanned face, and they regarded her with open curiosity. "I can manage," Delilah said, though her arms were already aching. The cowboy tilted his head slightly, studying her. "I am sure you can, but there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered." Something in his tone, the genuine kindness in it, made Delilah's carefully maintained composure crack just slightly. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, not here, not in front of everyone. "Thank you," she said quietly, and let him take the trunk from her hands. He lifted it as though it weighed nothing and fell into step beside her. "I am Vincent Irons," he said. "I work at the ranch about 5 miles north of town. Just came in for supplies." "Delilah Warren," she replied, and then, because she was tired and hurt and did not want him to hear it from someone else first, added, "the disgraced schoolteacher." Vincent glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I heard some talk in the general store. Pemberton was running his mouth about it to anyone who would listen." "Then you know." Delilah kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. "You know that I am not fit to teach children, that I have a past that makes me unsuitable for respectable employment." They had reached the boarding house, and Vincent set her trunk down on the porch. He took off his hat, running a hand through his hair, and looked at her with those startling green eyes. "I know that Cornelius Pemberton is a self-righteous fool who would not recognize true character if it bit him," Vincent said slowly. and I know that judging someone for doing what they had to do to survive is about the lowest thing a person can do." Delilah stared at him, surprised by the heat in his words. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." Vincent settled his hat back on his head. "I know you came all this way for a job. I know you worked your way through teacher's college. That takes grit and determination. And I know that the best people I have ever met are the ones who have had to fight for everything they have." Something warm bloomed in Delilah's chest, something she had not felt in a long time. Hope, maybe, or just gratitude that someone in this town did not look at her with contempt. "Thank you for carrying my trunk," she said softly, "and for your kind words." Vincent touched the brim of his hat. "You are welcome, Miss Warren." He started to turn away, then paused. "If you are looking for work, my employer at the ranch might have something. We could use help with the cooking and the household management. The pay is decent and you would have a place to stay. It is not teaching, but it is honest work." "I will consider it," Delilah said, though she was already considering it very seriously. She could not afford to be proud. Vincent nodded and walked away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Delilah watched him go, feeling something shift inside her. For the first time since Pemberton had delivered his crushing rejection, she felt like she might survive this after all. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked Delilah up and down when she came to the desk, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I heard about your trouble with the school board," Mrs. Fletcher said without preamble. "I run a respectable establishment here, Miss Warren." "I understand," Delilah said quietly. "I am looking for a room for a few nights while I sort out my situation." Mrs. Fletcher studied her for a long moment, and then something in her expression softened just slightly. "I knew your predecessor, the last teacher they had here. She was a good woman, but she married a rancher and moved away. The children need someone to teach them. Pemberton is a fool." The words were unexpected, and Delilah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you?" "That does not mean I am going to give you special treatment," Mrs. Fletcher said briskly. $2 a night, meals included. You can stay as long as you can pay." Delilah counted out the money from her carefully hoarded funds and took the key to her room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. She sat down on the bed and allowed herself, finally, to feel the full weight of her disappointment. She had wanted so badly to be a teacher, to help children learn and grow, to make a difference in their lives. She had studied so hard, had sacrificed so much, and it had all come to nothing because of a past she could not change. But Vincent's words echoed in her mind. Your past, he had implied, was not something to be ashamed of. It was evidence of her strength, her resilience. And maybe he was right. Maybe the problem was not with her, but with people like Pemberton who could not see past their own narrow judgments. Delilah unpacked her few belongings and washed the dust of travel from her face and hands. Then she sat down at the small desk in the corner of the room and wrote a letter to the ranch Vincent had mentioned. If there was work available, she would take it. She would prove to this town that she was more than her past, that she was worthy of respect, even if it had to be earned one day at a time. The next morning, Delilah received a reply delivered by a young ranch hand who could not have been more than 16. The message was simple and direct. Mrs. Harriet Irons, owner of the Irons Ranch, would be pleased to interview Miss Warren for the position of housekeeper. If she was interested, the boy would drive her out to the ranch that afternoon. Delilah accepted immediately. She spent the morning washing and pressing her best dress, a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned up her dark blonde hair in a neat bun and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked respectable, she thought. She looked like someone who could be trusted with important work. The ride to the ranch took about an hour, the wagon rattling over rutted roads through the prairie. The land stretched out endlessly in all directions, golden grass waving in the wind, and Delilah found herself captivated by the raw beauty of it. She had grown up in the city, where buildings crowded together, and the sky was always narrowed by rooftops. Here, the sky seemed infinite, and the air smelled of grass and earth and possibility. The Irons Ranch was larger than she had expected, with a sprawling house built of sturdy timber, several barns and outbuildings, and extensive corrals where horses moved restlessly. The young ranch hand helped her down from the wagon and led her to the front door, where a woman in her 50s waited with a welcoming smile. Mrs. Harriet Irons was a handsome woman with graying dark hair and the same striking green eyes as her son. She wore a practical dress and an apron, and her hands were calloused from years of hard work. But her manner was warm as she ushered Delilah inside. "Miss Warren, welcome. Vincent told me about meeting you in town yesterday. Please come sit in the parlor and we will talk." The house was comfortable and well kept, with simple but solid furniture and windows that let in plenty of light. Mrs. Irons served tea and settled into a chair across from Delilah, regarding her with keen but not unkind eyes. "My son tells me you were treated poorly by the school board," Mrs. Irons said without preamble. "Cornelius Pemberton is a sanctimonious hypocrite, if you will pardon my language. His own father made his fortune running a saloon, but somehow Cornelius has convinced himself he is better than everyone else." Delilah set down her teacup carefully. "I appreciate your kindness, Mrs. Irons. I want you to know that the work I did in St. Louis was honest work. I was never a—" She trailed off, not sure how to phrase it delicately. "I know what you were and what you were not," Mrs. Irons said firmly. "And I do not care about your past, Miss Warren. What I care about is whether you can manage a household, whether you are honest and hard-working, and whether you can cook a decent meal for a crew of hungry ranch hands." "I can do all of those things," Delilah said with quiet confidence. "I learned to cook from my mother, and I managed my father's household after she died when I was 15. I am organized and efficient, and I am not afraid of hard work." Mrs. Irons smiled. "That is what I wanted to hear. The position is simple. You would be responsible for cooking 3 meals a day for myself, my son, and 4 ranch hands who live here year-round. You would keep the house clean, manage the laundry, and handle any other household tasks that arise. In return, you would have your own room, all your meals, and $35 a month. Does that sound acceptable?" $35 a month was more than Delilah had expected, more than she would have made as a teacher. "It sounds more than acceptable, Mrs. Irons. It sounds like an answer to a prayer." "Good." Mrs. Irons stood and extended her hand. "Then welcome to the Irons Ranch, Miss Warren. When can you start?" "Immediately, if you would like," Delilah said, shaking her hand. "I have very few belongings. I can gather them from the boarding house and be here by this evening." "That would be perfect. I will send the wagon back into town with you right now." The arrangement was made, and within hours Delilah found herself settled into a small but comfortable room on the 2nd floor of the ranch house. It had a real bed with a good mattress, a wardrobe, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the prairie. It was the nicest room she had lived in since her father's death. Mrs. Irons showed her the kitchen, a large, well-equipped space with a modern cook stove and plenty of storage. There was a pantry stocked with staples, a cold cellar for storing meat and vegetables, and a herb garden just outside the back door. Delilah felt a sense of purpose settle over her as she explored her new domain. This was work she could do well, work that mattered. That first evening, she prepared dinner for the household with Mrs. Irons working beside her, showing her where things were kept and how the routine typically ran. Delilah made a simple but hearty meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and greens from the garden. When the ranch hands filed in, dusty and tired from a long day's work, they greeted her with shy nods and curious glances. And then Vincent walked in, and his face lit up when he saw her standing at the stove. "Miss Warren," he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "You took the job." "I did," Delilah replied, feeling a flutter in her chest at the way he was looking at her. "I hope you do not mind having me around." "Mind?" Vincent hung his hat on a peg by the door and crossed to wash his hands at the basin. "It is the best news I have heard in weeks. My mother is a wonderful woman, but her cooking leaves something to be desired." "Vincent Irons," Mrs. Irons said, but she was laughing. "I feed you well enough." "You keep us alive, Ma," Vincent said affectionately. "That is not quite the same thing." Dinner was a lively affair, with conversation flowing easily around the table. The ranch hands were friendly, ranging in age from a grizzled older man named Thomas to a young man barely into his 20s named Peter. They complimented Delilah's cooking enthusiastically and made her feel welcome in a way that the people of Newton had not. But it was Vincent she found her eyes returning to throughout the meal. He sat at the head of the table, across from his mother at the other end, and he smiled often as he listened to the talk around him. He had strong hands and laugh lines around his eyes, and when he caught Delilah watching him, he held her gaze for a moment that made her heart skip. After dinner, Delilah insisted on cleaning up, wanting to prove herself capable on her first day. Mrs. Irons retired to the parlor with her knitting, and the ranch hands headed out to check on the horses one last time before bed. Vincent stayed behind, drying dishes as Delilah washed them. "You did not have to help," Delilah said, very aware of how close he was standing. "I wanted to," Vincent said simply. "Besides, it gives me a chance to talk to you without everyone else around." Delilah's hands stilled in the soapy water. "What did you want to talk about?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, drying a plate with careful attention. "I wanted to make sure you were all right. Yesterday in town, you looked like someone who had been dealt a hard blow. I hope coming out here helps." "It does," Delilah said softly. "Your mother is very kind. You all are. I feel like I can breathe again." "Good." Vincent set down the dish and turned to look at her directly. "What Pemberton said to you, what he implied about you, it was wrong. You know that, right?" Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes again. She had spent so long feeling ashamed, feeling like she had to apologize for her past, that hearing someone defend her so simply and directly was almost overwhelming. "I worked in a dance hall," she said, needing him to understand the full truth. "I served drinks. I danced with men who paid for the privilege. I smiled and laughed and pretended I enjoyed their attention, even when they were drunk and handsy and said things that made my skin crawl. I did it because I had no choice, because the alternative was starving or worse. But I did it, and I cannot take it back, and people will always judge me for it." Vincent reached out and gently took the plate she was still holding, setting it in the rinse water. Then he took her wet hands in his, not seeming to care that he was getting soap on his own skin. "Your past made you who you are," he said quietly, his green eyes intense. "And you are perfect." Delilah drew in a sharp breath. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Vincent was looking at her now, like she was something precious and valuable exactly as she was. "I am not perfect," she whispered. "Maybe not," Vincent conceded with a small smile. "But you are strong and you are brave, and you survived something that would have broken a lesser person. That is pretty close to perfect in my book." Delilah did not know what to say. She stood there with her hands in his, feeling the warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his presence, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt seen. Not judged, not pitied, but truly seen for who she was. "Thank you," she finally managed to say. Vincent squeezed her hands gently and then released them, stepping back. "No thanks necessary. I am just telling you the truth." He picked up the dish towel again. "Now, let us finish these dishes so you can get some rest. I am sure you are tired from all the travel and change." They finished the cleaning in companionable silence, and when Delilah went upstairs to her room that night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Vincent's words over and over in her mind. "Your past made you who you are, and you are perfect." It was a radical idea that her past was not something to be hidden or apologized for, but something that had shaped her into someone strong and worthy. And the fact that Vincent saw her that way, that he looked at her with respect and something that might be the beginning of admiration, made her feel like maybe she could see herself that way too. The days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Delilah rose early each morning to prepare breakfast, feeding the household before the men headed out for their work on the ranch. She spent her days cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, mending clothes, and managing the countless small tasks that kept a household running smoothly. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way that dancing in the saloon had never been. Mrs. Irons was an easy employer, grateful for Delilah's competence and happy to have someone else managing the household so she could focus on the business side of the ranch. She treated Delilah more like a companion than a servant, and they spent many evenings together in the parlor, Mrs. Irons teaching Delilah to do fancy work while they talked about everything from politics to philosophy to the challenges of running a ranch in uncertain times. The ranch hands were respectful and friendly, and Delilah quickly learned their preferences and quirks. Thomas liked his coffee strong and his eggs scrambled. Peter was always hungry and appreciated extra helpings. Daniel and Marcus, the other two hands, were brothers who had worked at the ranch for 5 years and knew its operations better than anyone. And then there was Vincent. He was often out on the range, working from sunup to sundown. But when he was at the house, Delilah found herself acutely aware of his presence. He was unfailingly kind and courteous, always ready with a smile or a word of appreciation for her cooking. But there was something else too, a tension that hummed between them whenever they were in the same room. He would catch her eye across the dinner table and hold her gaze just a moment longer than necessary. He would find excuses to be in the kitchen when she was working, helping her carry heavy pots or reaching things from high shelves. He listened when she talked, really listened, his full attention focused on her in a way that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. Delilah told herself not to read too much into it. Vincent was a good man, a kind man, and he was probably just being friendly. She was an employee in his mother's house, and anything more than friendship would be inappropriate. But her heart did not seem to care about what was appropriate. It beat faster whenever he came near, and she found herself looking forward to meals and evenings, not because of the food or the conversation, but because she knew she would see him. 3 weeks after Delilah arrived at the ranch, Mrs. Irons announced at breakfast that she needed to go into town for supplies and to attend a meeting of the ladies' auxiliary at the church. She asked if Delilah would like to come along, but Delilah declined. She had no desire to face the judgment of the Newton townswomen, and she had plenty of work to keep her busy at the ranch. Vincent, however, decided to ride into town with his mother, saying he needed to speak with the bank about a loan for expanding their herd. The ranch hands were out working on the far pastures, and Delilah found herself alone at the house for the first time since she had arrived. She used the quiet time to give the kitchen a thorough cleaning, scrubbing every surface and reorganizing the pantry. She was on her hands and knees washing the floor when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast, too fast. Something was wrong. Delilah scrambled to her feet and went to the front door just as Vincent came thundering into the yard. He vaulted off his horse before it had even fully stopped, his face grim. "Are you all right?" he demanded, crossing to her in 3 long strides. "I am fine," Delilah said, bewildered. "What is wrong? Where is your mother?" "She is still in town. I left her there." Vincent ran a hand through his hair, agitated. "I heard some men talking at the general store. They were saying things about you. Vile things." Delilah's stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "It does not matter." Vincent's jaw was tight. "I set them straight, but I needed to make sure you were safe, that no one had come out here to bother you." "No one has been here," Delilah assured him. She reached out without thinking and touched his arm. "Vincent, you did not have to defend me. I am used to people saying things." "Well, you should not have to be used to it," Vincent said fiercely. He looked down at where her hand rested on his arm, and some of the tension seemed to go out of him. "I cannot stand it, Delilah. I cannot stand the way people in this town treat you. You deserve better." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it made her breath catch. People believe what they want to believe. Then they are fools. Vincent covered her hand with his own, his touch warm and strong. "I wish you could see yourself the way I see you." "And how do you see me?" Delilah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent looked at her for a long moment, something raw and honest in his green eyes. "I see someone beautiful and brave, someone who has been through fire and come out stronger for it. Someone I cannot stop thinking about, no matter how hard I try." Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Vincent." "I know I should not say these things," Vincent continued, the words coming faster now, like he had been holding them back for too long. "You work for my mother. You are here because you needed a safe place, not because you wanted some cowboy making things complicated. But I cannot help it, Delilah. From the moment I saw you standing in the street in Newton, looking lost and hurt and defiant all at once, I have not been able to get you out of my mind." "I think about you too," Delilah admitted, her heart soaring even as her mind warned her to be careful. "All the time." Vincent's hand tightened on hers. "You do?" "Yes." Delilah took a step closer to him. "You have been nothing but kind to me from the very beginning. You looked at me and saw me, not my past. Do you have any idea what that means to someone like me?" "Someone like you," Vincent repeated, and there was something almost angry in his tone now. "You say that like you are somehow less than other people, but you are not. You are more. You are incredible." Delilah felt tears welling up, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of joy, of feeling valued and cherished in a way she had never expected to feel again. "I do not deserve you," she whispered. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard," Vincent said, and then he was cupping her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "If anything, I do not deserve you, but if you will have me, if you will give me a chance, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Delilah could not speak past the lump in her throat, so she did the only thing she could think of. She rose up on her toes and kissed him. For a moment, Vincent went perfectly still, as if he could not quite believe what was happening, and then he was kissing her back, his arms coming around her, pulling her close. It was a gentle kiss, tender and sweet, full of promise and possibility. Delilah felt like she was floating, like her heart was going to burst from sheer happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "So have I," Delilah said, smiling through her tears. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, and Delilah felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be, not teaching in a schoolroom in Newton, but here, with this man who saw all of her and loved what he saw. "My mother is going to be so pleased," Vincent said eventually, a laugh in his voice. "She has been dropping hints about how wonderful you are for the past 2 weeks." Delilah pulled back slightly to look up at him. "She has? Constantly." Vincent grinned. "She told me yesterday that if I did not ask to court you soon, she was going to do it for me." Delilah laughed, the sound bright and free. "I like your mother very much. She likes you too. She told me you were the best thing that has happened to this ranch in years." Vincent's expression grew serious again. "Delilah, I meant what I said. I want to court you properly. I want to see where this goes between us, but only if that is what you want too. I do not want you to feel pressured or like you owe me anything because of the job." "I do not feel pressured," Delilah said firmly, "and I would very much like for you to court me, Vincent Irons." The smile that spread across Vincent's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He kissed her again, and this time there was more confidence in it, more heat. Delilah melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and let herself feel the full force of the attraction that had been building between them since the day they met. When Mrs. Irons returned from town later that afternoon, she took one look at the two of them sitting together on the porch, Vincent's hand holding Delilah's, and smiled knowingly. "About time," was all she said, and went inside, humming to herself. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Delilah had experienced before. In St. Louis, men had courted her with expensive gifts and empty flattery, trying to impress her with their wealth or their connections. Vincent courted her with simple sincerity. He brought her wildflowers he picked from the prairie. He took her on long walks in the evenings, showing her the land he loved and telling her stories about growing up on the ranch. He listened to her talk about her dreams of teaching, and he never once made her feel foolish for still wanting that, even after her rejection. They stole kisses in the kitchen when no one was looking. They sat together at dinner, their legs touching under the table. They spent hours on the porch after everyone else had gone to bed, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's hearts. Vincent told her about his father, who had died 5 years ago from a fall off a horse, and how he had worked to keep the ranch going for his mother's sake. He told her about his fears that he was not good enough, not smart enough, not ambitious enough, and Delilah held his hands and told him that he was more than enough, that the kindness in his heart and the strength of his character were worth more than all the ambition in the world. Delilah told Vincent about her mother, who had died when she was 15, and her father, who had drunk himself to death 2 years later, leaving her alone in the world. She told him about the dance hall, about the shame she had felt, and the determination that had driven her to escape. And Vincent listened without judgment, his eyes full of compassion, and told her again and again that her past only made her stronger, only made her more remarkable. A month after they began courting, Vincent took Delilah into town with him. She was nervous about facing the people of Newton again, but Vincent held her hand and walked beside her with his head high, making it clear to everyone they encountered that he was proud to be with her. They stopped at the general store for supplies, and Cornelius Pemberton was there, pompous as ever. He looked at Delilah with barely concealed disdain and turned his back on her pointedly. Vincent's jaw tightened, but before he could say anything, a woman's voice cut through the tension. "Delilah Warren, I have been hoping to see you again." Delilah turned to see a young woman about her own age, with bright red hair and freckles across her nose. She looked vaguely familiar, but Delilah could not place her. "I am sorry," Delilah said hesitantly. Have we met? Catherine Morris, the woman said, extending her hand warmly. I was at the boarding house when you first arrived in town. I heard what Pemberton said to you, and I thought it was the most unjust thing I have ever witnessed. Delilah shook her hand, surprised and touched. Thank you. I wanted to say something at the time, but I was too much of a coward, Catherine continued. But I have been thinking about it ever since, and I want you to know that not everyone in Newton agrees with the school board's decision. Some of us think they are being ridiculous and hypocritical. Here, here, said another voice. An older woman with kind eyes stepped forward. I am Margaret Hollis. My husband runs the bank. We have 2 children who desperately need a good teacher. The woman they hired instead of you cannot keep order in the classroom, and the children are learning nothing. More people began to speak up. Some Delilah recognized from around town, others she had never met. They told her that they had heard about her situation and thought she had been treated unfairly. They said that the school board did not speak for the whole town. They said that if she was willing, they would petition to have her hired as the teacher she was meant to be. Delilah looked at Vincent, who was grinning broadly, and then back at the growing crowd of supporters. She felt overwhelmed, almost unable to process what was happening. I do not know what to say, she admitted. Say you will consider it, Margaret Hollis urged. We need you, Miss Warren. Our children need you. Cornelius Pemberton, who had been watching this exchange with mounting anger, finally interjected. This is absurd. The school board has already made its decision. Then we will change the school board, Catherine Morris said firmly. There is an election next month. I think we can all agree that some new leadership is needed. The crowd murmured their agreement, and Pemberton's face turned an alarming shade of red. But he clearly knew when he was outnumbered. He turned on his heel and stalked out of the store, slamming the door behind him. Vincent squeezed Delilah's hand. What do you think? I think, Delilah said slowly, that I would very much like to teach again. But I am happy at the ranch, too. I do not want to give up what I have found there. You would not have to, Mrs. Irons said, stepping forward from where she had been watching the whole scene with interest. The schoolhouse is only a few miles from the ranch. You could ride in each day to teach and still come home to us in the evenings. Home. The word settled over Delilah like a warm blanket. The ranch had become home in a way nowhere else ever had, and the idea that she could have both, could teach and also be part of the life she had built there, was almost too good to be true. Then yes, Delilah said, her voice growing stronger. If the town will have me, I would be honored to be your teacher. The crowd erupted in applause, and Catherine Morris hugged her impulsively. Plans were immediately made to organize the petition and campaign for new school board members. Delilah found herself surrounded by people offering support and encouragement, and she felt tears of gratitude stinging her eyes. Vincent stayed close beside her through it all, his presence a steady anchor. When they finally left the store and headed back to the ranch, Delilah could not stop smiling. I cannot believe that just happened, she said. I can, Vincent said. People are not all bad, Delilah. Most of them are fundamentally decent. They just needed someone to stand up and say what they were all thinking. Thank you for bringing me to town today. I do not think I would have had the courage to face everyone on my own. Vincent brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You are the bravest person I know, but I am glad I could be there with you. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The petition to rehire Delilah as the teacher gathered signatures quickly, with nearly 3/4 of the town's families signing in support. The school board election was contentious, with Pemberton and his allies fighting hard to maintain their positions. But in the end, reform candidates won decisively. 2 months after Delilah had first arrived in Newton, she stood in front of a classroom full of eager children, ready to begin her first day as their teacher. The room was simple, with wooden desks and a chalkboard, but to Delilah it was perfect. This was what she had worked so hard for, what she had dreamed of through all those nights in the dance hall when the future seemed impossibly far away. She taught reading and writing, arithmetic and history. She read to the children from classic books and taught them poetry and geography. She was firm but fair, and the children responded to her with enthusiasm and respect. Within weeks, it was clear that she was exactly the teacher Newton had needed, and every evening, Delilah rode home to the ranch where Vincent would be waiting to help her down from her horse and listen to her stories about her day. Mrs. Irons would have dinner ready, and they would all sit around the table together, a family in all the ways that mattered. 6 months after they began courting, Vincent proposed. He did it simply, taking Delilah on a ride out to a spot where the prairie met a small creek, where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water ran clear over smooth stones. He got down on one knee and pulled out a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Delilah Warren," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you are the strongest, most beautiful, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You have made my life better in every possible way. Will you marry me?" Delilah did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him with all the love and joy in her heart. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in the fall of 1874 in a ceremony at the small church in Newton. Catherine Morris was Delilah's maid of honor, and Thomas, the oldest ranch hand, stood up with Vincent. The church was packed with people from the town and the surrounding ranches, all of them there to celebrate a love story that had overcome judgment and prejudice. Mrs. Irons cried happy tears throughout the ceremony and threw a lavish party at the ranch afterward, with food and music and dancing that lasted until well after dark. Delilah danced with Vincent under the stars, her white dress swirling around her, and felt happier than she had ever thought possible. "I love you," Vincent whispered in her ear as they swayed to the music. "I loved you from the moment I saw you standing in the street, looking like you were ready to take on the world even though your heart was breaking." "I love you too," Delilah whispered back. "You saved me, Vincent, not from my past, but from the belief that my past defined me. You showed me that I was so much more than what had happened to me." "You saved yourself," Vincent corrected gently. "I just had the privilege of being there to witness it." They moved into a small house on the ranch property that Vincent had been building in secret for months, a wedding surprise. It was cozy and perfect, with a bedroom and a parlor and a kitchen where Delilah could cook just for the two of them. Mrs. Irons hired a new housekeeper for the main house, insisting that Delilah had earned the right to focus on her teaching and her new marriage. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Delilah taught during the week and spent her evenings with Vincent, cooking dinner together and talking about their days. On weekends, they would ride out on the prairie together, exploring the vast landscape that was their home. Vincent taught Delilah to rope and ride better, and she taught him to read more complex books, expanding the education he had gotten from the limited schooling available on the frontier. A year after their wedding, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little fear. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, far from doctors and hospitals, but Mrs. Irons had helped birth dozens of babies in her time and promised she would take good care of Delilah. Delilah continued teaching through her pregnancy until she was too far along to comfortably make the ride to town each day. The school board, now reformed and supportive, hired a temporary teacher to finish out the school year and promised Delilah her position would be waiting for her when she was ready to return. In the spring of 1876, on a warm May afternoon, Delilah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Vincent was there throughout the labor, holding her hand and wiping her brow, refusing to leave despite his mother's insistence that childbirth was women's work. And when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Vincent took him in his arms with tears streaming down his face. "What should we name him?" Delilah asked, exhausted but radiant. Vincent looked down at his son and then up at his wife. "What about James, after your father?" Delilah's throat tightened with emotion. Her father had made many mistakes in his life, but he had loved her in his way. "James Warren Irons," she said. "It is perfect." Little James was a happy, healthy baby who grew strong on the fresh air and love that surrounded him. He had his father's green eyes and his mother's blonde hair, and both his parents doted on him shamelessly. Mrs. Irons was a devoted grandmother, and even the ranch hands would stop by to coo over the baby and bring him small hand-carved toys. When James was 6 months old, Delilah returned to teaching part-time, bringing the baby with her to school on the days when Vincent or his mother could not watch him. The children were enchanted by the baby, and the older girls would help care for him during recess, treating it as a lesson in responsibility. The years passed peacefully and happily. Delilah and Vincent's love only deepened as they built their life together. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Hope in 1878, and another son they named Matthew in 1881. The little house on the ranch was expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Vincent adding rooms and Mrs. Irons sewing curtains and helping to make each space warm and welcoming. Delilah continued to teach, becoming one of the most respected educators in the county. Former students would come back to visit her, telling her how much her belief in them had shaped their lives. She never forgot where she had come from, and she made a point of treating every child with dignity and respect, knowing that you could never judge someone's potential by their circumstances. Vincent took over more of the ranch operations as his mother aged, eventually becoming the sole owner when Mrs. Irons decided to retire and focus on her grandchildren. He was a fair and respected rancher, known throughout Kansas for his integrity and his skill with horses. He and Delilah made decisions together, true partners in all aspects of their life. The town of Newton continued to grow and prosper, eventually losing its reputation as a wild cow town and becoming a respectable community with churches and schools and businesses. Delilah was a pillar of that community, serving on the school board herself and advocating tirelessly for better education and opportunities for all children, regardless of their background. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, Delilah and Vincent would sit on their porch and look out at the vast prairie, talking about how far they had come. Vincent would hold her hand and tell her that he loved her more with each passing year, and Delilah would rest her head on his shoulder and feel the truth of it in her bones. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if Pemberton had hired you as a teacher that first day? Vincent asked once. Delilah considered the question. Sometimes. I suppose I would have found a room in town and taught my classes and lived a quiet, respectable life. I would have been fine. Just fine, Delilah agreed. She turned to look at her husband, this man who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. But I would not have had this. I would not have had you, or our children, or this beautiful life we have built together. I would not have learned that my past was not something to be ashamed of, but something that made me strong. So no, I do not wish things had gone differently. I am grateful for every step that led me here, even the painful ones. Vincent kissed her tenderly. I am grateful too. Grateful that you walked into my life. Grateful that you gave me a chance. Grateful for every single day I get to spend loving you. In 1885, Catherine Morris, who had become one of Delilah's closest friends, decided to run for a position on the town council. She was one of the first women in Kansas to do so, and the campaign was difficult and sometimes ugly, but Delilah stood by her side, campaigning and organizing and refusing to be intimidated by those who thought women had no place in politics. Catherine won her election by a narrow margin, and she served with distinction, using her position to advocate for better schools, safer working conditions, and more opportunities for women. The fight for women's rights was slow and often frustrating, but Delilah felt like she was part of something important, something that would make life better for her daughter and the generations of girls who would come after. She taught hope in her female students that they could be anything they wanted to be, that their past and their gender did not have to limit their future. By the early 1890s, Delilah and Vincent's children were growing up. James was a serious boy who loved books and wanted to study law. Hope was spirited and brave, dreaming of becoming a doctor despite the many obstacles facing women in medicine. Matthew was the most like his father, happiest when he was working with the horses on the ranch. Mrs. Irons passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1892, at the age of 72. She had lived to see her grandchildren grow and thrive, and her last words to Delilah were that she had been the daughter she had always wanted. The loss was hard, but they took comfort in knowing that she had lived a full and happy life, surrounded by people who loved her. The ranch continued to prosper under Vincent's management. He had a gift for breeding horses, and Irons Ranch became known throughout Kansas and beyond for producing some of the finest stock in the region. He treated his employees fairly and built a reputation as an honest man, the kind of person others wanted to do business with. Delilah eventually stepped back from full-time teaching as her children needed her more at home, but she continued to tutor students who were struggling and served on the school board for over 20 years. She also began writing articles about education for newspapers and journals, sharing her philosophy that every child deserved a chance regardless of their background. Her writing reached people far beyond Newton, and she received letters from teachers and parents across the country, thanking her for her insights and inspiration. In the summer of 1895, a reporter from a Kansas City newspaper came to Newton to write a story about the town's transformation from rough cow town to thriving community. He interviewed Delilah as part of his research, asking her about her role in the town's development. "You are quite famous, you know," the reporter said. "People speak of you as an example of what the frontier spirit truly means. Someone who faced adversity and overcame it through determination and character." Delilah, now in her mid-40s, smiled at the characterization. "I am just a teacher and a mother. I have not done anything special." "I beg to differ," the reporter said. "You were rejected by this town because of your past, and yet you stayed and won them over through your actions and your integrity. That is remarkable." "I had help," Delilah said, her eyes finding Vincent, who was working with one of the horses in the corral nearby. "My husband believed in me when no one else did. He looked past my past and saw who I really was. That gave me the strength to believe in myself." The reporter followed her gaze. "Would you say he saved you?" Delilah thought about the question carefully. "No, I saved myself. But he walked beside me while I did it, and that made all the difference." When the article was published a few weeks later, it painted a glowing picture of Newton and its resilient residents. Delilah was featured prominently, her story told with respect and admiration. The article ended with a quote from Vincent that made Delilah cry when she read it. "My wife is the strongest person I know," he had told the reporter. "Her past made her who she is, and who she is perfect. I fall more in love with her every single day." As the century drew to a close, Delilah and Vincent looked forward to a new era. Their children were finding their paths in life. James had been accepted to law school back east. Hope was fighting for admission to medical school, determined to become a doctor despite the many barriers in her way. Matthew was working the ranch alongside his father, learning everything Vincent could teach him about managing the land and the animals. Delilah and Vincent were in their late 40s now, their hair showing gray, their faces lined by sun and laughter, but their love was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having weathered the challenges of building a life together. They took a trip to San Francisco in 1899, their first real vacation in years. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate in fine restaurants, and walked along the waterfront watching the ships come and go. It was so different from the prairie, from the wide open spaces they had always called home, and yet Delilah found she was ready to return to Kansas after only a week. "I miss the ranch," she confessed to Vincent as they sat on a bench overlooking the bay. "So do I," Vincent admitted. "This is beautiful, but it is not home." "No," Delilah agreed, leaning against him. "Home is a small house on a Kansas prairie, with 3 amazing children and the best man I have ever known." Vincent wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I never imagined my life would turn out like this, that I would be so happy, so blessed, and it is all because of you." "We blessed each other," Delilah said softly. "We chose each other, past and all, and we built something beautiful together." They returned to Kansas renewed and ready for whatever the new century would bring. The year 1900 arrived with celebrations and hope for the future. Newton was now a proper town with paved streets and electric lights, so different from the dusty frontier settlement Delilah had arrived in all those years ago. James graduated from law school and returned to Kansas to practice, quickly building a reputation as a skilled and ethical attorney. Hope, against all odds, was accepted to medical school in Chicago, one of only 3 women in her class. She sent letters home describing the challenges and triumphs of her studies, and Delilah saved every one of them, proud beyond measure of her daughter's determination. Matthew married a girl from a neighboring ranch in 1902, a sweet young woman named Sarah who fit into the Irons family as if she had always been there. They had their first child, a girl they named Harriet after her great-grandmother, in 1903, making Delilah and Vincent grandparents for the first time. Holding baby Harriet, Delilah felt the circle of life complete itself. She thought about her own difficult journey, the struggles and the pain and the ultimate triumph. And she felt grateful that this little girl would grow up in a world with more opportunities, more acceptance, more understanding that a person's past did not have to define their future. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, coming to sit beside her as she rocked the baby. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Delilah said. "How lucky we are to have found each other, to have built this life, to have this beautiful family." Vincent reached out and took her free hand in his, a gesture they had shared thousands of times over their nearly 30 years together. "I am the lucky one. You took a chance on a cowboy who was not very good with words, but who loved you more than anything in the world. You were always good with words, Delilah corrected with a smile. You told me that my past made me who I am and that I was perfect. Those were exactly the right words, at exactly the right time. And I meant every one of them, Vincent said. I still do. You are perfect, Delilah Irons. Perfect for me, perfect for our children, perfect exactly as you are. Delilah leaned over and kissed him, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby in her arms. After all these years, his kisses still made her heart flutter. After all these years, she still felt that sense of rightness, of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to pass, marked by milestones and memories. Hope graduated from medical school and opened a practice in Kansas City, becoming one of the first female doctors in the state. She never married, dedicating her life to her patients and her work, and Delilah supported her choice wholeheartedly, proud that her daughter had the freedom to choose her own path. James became a judge, known for his fairness and his compassion. He married a fellow attorney, and they had 2 children who brought more joy into the family. Matthew and Sarah took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch as Vincent gradually stepped back, though he never truly retired. He loved the land and the work too much to stop completely. In 1910, Delilah finally retired from the school board after serving for over 30 years. The town threw her a party, and former students came from across Kansas to honor her and thank her for the impact she had made on their lives. There were speeches and tears and laughter, and through it all, Vincent stood beside her, his hand in hers, his pride in her, evident to everyone. You changed this town, the current mayor said in his speech. You taught us that people deserve second chances, that character matters more than circumstances, that education can transform lives. Newton is a better place because of you, Mrs. Irons. Delilah looked out at the crowd, at the faces of people she had known for decades, at her children and grandchildren, at Vincent smiling at her with those green eyes that still made her heart skip, and she felt a profound sense of peace. Thank you, she said simply. This town gave me a second chance when I desperately needed one. It gave me a home, a purpose, and a family. I am the one who should be grateful. As they grew older, Delilah and Vincent spent more time together, taking long rides on the prairie like they had when they were courting, sitting on their porch watching the sunset, talking about their memories and their dreams. Their love had matured and deepened, no longer the passionate rush of youth, but something steadier and more profound. In the spring of 1918, as World War I raged in Europe, Vincent fell ill with pneumonia. The illness was severe, and for a terrifying week, Delilah thought she might lose him. She sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, willing him to fight. "You cannot leave me," she whispered to him in the darkest hours of the night. "We still have so much life to live together." Vincent survived, but the illness left him weakened. He could no longer do the hard physical work of ranching, and he had to accept that his time as an active rancher was over. It was a difficult transition for a man who had been strong and capable his whole life, but Delilah helped him through it with patience and love. "You have worked hard your entire life," she told him as they sat together on the porch, watching Matthew and his sons work the horses in the corral. "You built something lasting, something that will continue for generations. Now it is time to rest and enjoy the fruits of your labor." "I can enjoy them better with you beside me," Vincent said, squeezing her hand. And so they spent their final years together, surrounded by family and love. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1924 with a party that brought together 3 generations of the Irons family. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. They saw the world change in ways they could never have imagined when they were young, with automobiles and airplanes and radios bringing the world closer together. But through all the changes, one thing remained constant: the love between Delilah and Vincent, forged in the fires of judgment and prejudice, strengthened by years of partnership and mutual respect, never wavered. Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1927 at the age of 78. Delilah held his hand as he took his last breath, her heart breaking even as she felt grateful that they had been granted so many years together. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people from across Kansas, all of them there to honor a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Delilah lived for another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, writing her memoirs and working in the garden Vincent had planted for her decades ago. She was surrounded by love until the very end, passing away in the summer of 1932 at the age of 82. At her funeral, Hope stood up to give the eulogy. She was a distinguished doctor now, her hair silver, her face lined with wisdom and experience. She talked about her mother's strength, her compassion, her unwavering belief that every person deserved dignity and respect, regardless of their past. And she ended with the story that had become legend in the family. When my mother first came to Newton, Hope said, she was rejected for having a past. People judged her for the things she had done to survive, never looking deeper to see the person she truly was. But my father, Vincent Irons, saw what others missed. He told her that her past made her who she was and that she was perfect. Those words gave my mother the strength to believe in herself, to fight for her place in this community, to build a life of meaning and purpose. And in doing so, she taught all of us that our worth is not determined by where we have been, but by who we choose to become. The words echoed in the small church, and there was not a dry eye in the congregation. Delilah Warren Irons had lived a remarkable life, transforming from a rejected woman with a past into a beloved teacher, mother, grandmother, and pillar of her community. Her story was one of resilience and redemption, of love conquering judgment, of two people finding each other and building something beautiful together. And in the end, that was the legacy she left behind. Not just the school where she had taught hundreds of children, not just the family she had raised, but the simple, powerful truth that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, past and all. That love, real love, looks beyond the surface to the heart beneath, and that sometimes the most perfect people are the ones who have fought the hardest to become who they are. Years later, long after both Delilah and Vincent were gone, their great-great-grandchildren would walk the land of the Irons Ranch, now a historic property preserved for its significance to Kansas history. They would stand in the small house where Delilah and Vincent had raised their family, looking at the photographs on the walls, reading the letters and journals that had been carefully preserved. And they would learn the story of how a cowboy and a rejected teacher had found each other in the wild town of Newton, Kansas in 1873, and how their love had created a legacy that spanned generations. They would learn that Delilah had been judged for her past, but that Vincent had seen beyond that judgment to the remarkable woman beneath. They would learn that sometimes the most important thing you can say to someone is that they are perfect exactly as they are. The story of Delilah and Vincent became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of acceptance, the importance of looking beyond prejudice, and the transformative nature of true love. It reminded people that everyone has a story, that everyone deserves a second chance, and that the measure of a person is not where they have been, but how they choose to live their life. In the end, Delilah and Vincent's love story was a simple one. Two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose to see the best in each other, who built a life together based on respect and partnership and unwavering devotion. They faced challenges and overcame them together. They raised a family and built a community. They loved each other through youth and middle age and into their final years, never taking for granted the gift they had been given in finding each other. And if you had asked either of them, in those final golden years of their life together, what the secret was to their enduring love, they would have given you the same answer. Love, they would say, is not about finding someone perfect. It is about finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours, whose past has shaped them into someone you admire and respect, whose presence in your life makes you want to be the best version of yourself. Vincent had seen Delilah at her lowest point and told her she was perfect. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift one person can give another, the freedom to be exactly who she was, without shame or apology. That gift had transformed both of their lives, creating a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The prairie wind still blows across the Kansas landscape, just as it did when Delilah first arrived in Newton all those years ago. The town has changed, grown, evolved, but the story remains, passed down through generations, a reminder of a time when love conquered judgment, when acceptance triumphed over prejudice, and when a cowboy and a teacher built something beautiful together in the heart of the American West. Their graves sit side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, simple headstones marking their final resting place. The inscription is brief, just their names and dates, and a single line that Vincent had insisted on years before his death. Love sees no past, only potential. It was the truth they had lived by, the principle that had guided their life together, and the legacy they left for all who came after them. Delilah Warren and Vincent Irons had proven that true love does not demand perfection. It embraces the whole person, past and all, and finds beauty in the journey that made them who they are.